The race to be the first pharmaceutical company out with a successful vaccine against the COVID-19 strain of the coronavirus is on. Pfizer, with its partner BioNTech, came through first with what it said was a 90% success rate. Then it was the turn of Moderna, the first opportunity to get some sort of comparison. It said its success rate was closer to 95%, and its storage requirement was not as difficult as Pfizer's, which needed deep storage at very low temperatures. Then AstraZeneca, alongside its research partner, Oxford University, came out. Well, this appears to be the cheapest option, and that which requires more manageable storage needs, as it uses the equivalent of an ordinary household-type fridge. It looked great, but its success rate was 70%. But hold on, further data analysis has seemingly uncovered an error, and AstraZeneca and Oxford now say that its success rate is, too, 90%. There are others in the pipeline, including this Sputnik V vaccine, which is already being rolled out in Russia. On today's IG Trading the Markets podcast from Open Orphan, an AIM-listed company which is a world leader in testing vaccines and antivirals, is Chief Executive Cathal Friel. Cathal, it's good to talk to you. Let me begin, first of all, with what Open Orphan does in the context of vaccines and specifically COVID-19.
Jeremy, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me on. Open Orphan, we're the world leader in the testing of vaccines and antivirals. It was an amalgamation of two small companies. One was hVivo here in East London, and another one, Venn Life Science, based out of Paris and Amsterdam. We put the two together, and today we've got direct access on a daily basis. We're dealing with many of those companies you just mentioned. We deal with virtually all the vaccine development companies around the world. So we're in a really lucky position to share our views, I'd say, from the front line in the war on COVID-19. So very happy to share any of our insights of what we're doing, because that's our job, is to deal with the vaccine companies and help them get their products to the market.
So what do you make of what we're hearing about the vaccines on offer? It certainly seems to me to be a race in terms of stealing the headlines, but deep down, from someone that's in the business, what do you make of what you're hearing from the various different sources of vaccines that appear to be coming to the market?
Jeremy, look, it's very clear. The world was very scared for 6 months. And being honest with you, to ask any of us up to 2 weeks ago, will the Pfizer drug work or the vaccine? Will the Moderna one work? Will the Oxford? Till the data reads out, none of us knew. It's 50-50. However, not alone that Pfizer work, Moderna work, but Oxford. So I think that proves to the world that if you throw enough money at a problem, it can be fixed. Very clearly, there will be rollout issues. It'll take some time, but very clearly, the problem with COVID-19, it's really only dangerous. This is where a lot of our Tory backbenchers are getting very upset. The issue is for 5% of the population, the old, the sick, the infirm, doctors and nurses, COVID is deadly dangerous. It will hurt them, it will make them very sick, and it can kill you. For 95% of the population, you, me, and everybody else, if we're fit and healthy, and we're sub 75, we're in good shape. In most instances, it doesn't cause a problem. Yes, exceptional. However, the vaccines, what they do, and it's happened before, those who get the flu jab, the old, the sick, the elderly, the nurses, the doctors will get it. Once they've all been inoculated, that's only 5% of the world's population. That can be done very quickly. Then the government says, why are we shutting the world down? Because we've protected that 5% are vulnerable. They then roll it out towards next summer to the rest of us. So come into next summer, I believe COVID will be treated like bad annual seasonal flu, i.e. when you're getting, people have been told to take their flu jab, they'll also be saying, make sure and take your seasonal annual COVID jab. That'll be the Pfizer, Moderna, Oxford, etc. There's lots of them. Don't forget, J&J, Sofinova, there's a bunch more of them coming over the horizon. The only one issue, this is the first generation. They will give us immunity, and we all know this, somewhere between 6 to 12 months. That's mimicking what happens in nature in our body. There's another generation, we're seeing them already, and one of them is a drug called Codigenics. We'll be testing that in phase 1 in December in a quarantine unit. That's a full live attenuated virus. That's the vaccine. That may give you 4 to 5 or 6 years immunity. So that's the next generation. It won't be approved, I would say, 2022 at the earliest. So hopefully you see the drift. The first generation will give us immunity like the flu jab. The second one will be giving us multi-year protection.
Okay, so to be sure here, we're talking about a virus, or rather an injection against a virus. The injection, you seem to indicate, won't last us any more than 1 year. So this will have to be done every single year. Do we know that for a fact, or is that still supposition?
It's guess, supposition, but also mimicking what happens in your body. People worry about COVID. It's the seventh of 6 prior coronaviruses. The first one, OC43, discovered in 1943, 2298E, discovered in 98. But both of those have been around for a couple of hundred years. With SARS, MARS, there's 6 of them, plus our friend COVID-19. One thing the other 6 do, they're very predictable. They don't mutate, they don't change, and you don't get lifetime protection. When you get infected with any of those, you can begin 6 and 18 months protection. So naturally, the first generation of virus vaccines we get can't do much more than happens in nature. I think most people accept it'll be a 6 to 12 months immunity. However, the world is great, scientists are great. There is second generations already under development that will give us 4 to 5, 6 years protection. So it means once every 6 years. But next summer, it'll be once every year for a year or two.
If you can keep your head.
When all about you are losing theirs.
What possibilities might you see?
If you can see it.
The world is yours to trade and invest. See it. IG it.
What do you make of what we're hearing in terms of some of the issues that are surfacing about some of these? Pfizer particularly, my understanding is it requires very deep, low temperatures, specialist refrigeration. I mean, this is going to make it almost impossible, isn't it, to roll out globally? Whereas my understanding is, and as I said, there's some conjecture about whether it's 70% or 90% effective. This Oxford one is able to be stored successfully in what amounts to a household fridge. What is it that's going to be the issue here? Is it the storage issues? Is it the distribution issues? Or is it going to be the cost issues? Because there's cost to be attributed here as well. And my understanding is that at the moment, at least, the Oxford one is almost the cheapest.
Yeah, this is actually a very bigger picture, is that where we need to protect that 5 to 7% who've got a problem with COVID, who's dangerous. So the first world, and they say the United Kingdom government, I think, they've got a bigger than average allocation. They were ballsy. The vaccine task force got options and paid money over a very large quota of the Pfizer. Okay, it needs to be held at -80, but that's just dry ice. There'll be loads of, and the British government's made it clear, there'll be loads of the Pfizer available to anybody who needs it in the UK. Moderna, likewise, needs -20. -20 is your household freezer. So there's loads of freezer capacity. The -80 is a little bit trickier, but it's not impossible. However, to go to the developed world, there isn't a lot of freezers, and there's definitely not a lot of -80. So the developed world will use the likes of the Oxford one, which is an inactivated virus. It's called an endovirus. And that's the exact same as normal vaccine. So that will get, but do bear in mind, a lot of the developed world, particularly Africa, COVID doesn't seem to be causing a huge problem. They've said they deal with pandemics all the time. So I think to get the world going, the first world is where the big panic is. They'll have no problem shipping the Pfizer, Moderna around at -20 or -80 to have facilities. Might be a little trickier in the developed world. But the Oxford AstraZeneca one has already done deals with the Serum Institute in India and lots of other facilities around the world. So that one. And then don't forget, you have J&J, you have Sofinova, you have a bunch of other ones. As Boris says, you hear the toot of them coming over the hill. There's lots of these. And I'm absolutely certain by Easter, there'll be absolutely anybody in the world who wants a COVID protection. It'll be there. I don't think everybody will take it. A lot of people won't take it, but those who need it will have it, no matter where in the world you'll be.
Well, that's an interesting subject as well. I mean, I guess this is really one for the pubs and clubs into the evening, where we talk about some of the fears, the worries, those that are very skeptical have some dreadful horror stories about the potential for some of this. Let's steer clear of some of those that are cynical of what these large pharmaceutical companies are doing, and talk a little bit more about these vaccines, the efficacy, the amount of time that they last, and so forth. You talk there about other companies we have yet to see developments from, like Johnson & Johnson, some really big names still to come through. Do you think that we have yet to see like the best option come through? At the moment, you're talking there about having injections once every year. as a child in the developed world, we are inoculated against things like measles, mumps and rubella. We only receive one of those, and that seemingly takes us through certainly childhood years, if not into adult life as well. Do you see a time coming when we will only need one COVID injection, which will take us through for the rest of our lives? Or do you think because of the way COVID is and the coronavirus generally, that we will have to keep on taking these in order to cover, if not mutations, variations of this same disease, this same virus?
Jeremy, very good question, but I can answer it. Phase 1, yes, unfortunately, they're coming fast and they've proven it will be annually. But absolutely, this will be a drug eventually that you'll take. It'll give you lifetime immunity. And the reason being is they're proving, both particularly the mRNA, they can target the spike protein and it works. They just have to make it a little bit more powerful, a little bit more potent. Going forward, so the world really wants to know when we can get back to normal. I think it's next summer. Next summer, the reason around the world that things have to be shut down, and it's terrible if you're in the hospitality, travel, tourism, pub, shops, restaurant, hotels. However, we can't expose that 5%. We can't say, okay, it doesn't matter if elderly grandparents get sick and die. So once they've got access to vaccines, we'll get used to it. And it's a case of we'll learn to live with COVID. It might be some time before it goes away. But it means even at the moment, look at the death rates. The death rates has fallen through the floors. Okay, there's a lot of people in the hospitals because in the last 6 months, if you or I go to hospital today and we've got bad COVID, we're out in 3 days, we get pumped full of steroids, we get antivirals. And if we're really in trouble, we get monoclonal. So the death rate compared to March is literally, look at the world's greatest clinical trial. Our former friend in the White House, he was difficulty breathing on a Friday night at 4:00. He was quietly given steroids. And then late at 8:00, he got antivirals. And by Saturday morning, he was in chirper form. And bear in mind, Sunday he was out driving around waving to people. Then they got monoclonal. It looks like for President Trump, he seems to be almost like the jolly green giant, or what do you call him, the Green Hulk. It almost did him the world of good. He's got almost mojo back in him. So the reality is two things. The rescue therapy when we go to hospital is simple: steroids, antivirals, monoclonal. They weren't available 6 months ago, so there's a high death rate. And then we have good vaccines. So it's come at both sides. So I think absolutely next summer, it's life back to usual, but it won't go away for a year or two till we get longer term. But look, for the people who are worried about COVID, an annual COVID shot is pretty good. There will be people who say, I'll never take a vaccine. What will happen is that a friend, a relation who also says they won't take it will get sick. They'll get the fright. They won't die. They'll go into hospital. They'll get the steroids. They'll get the antivirals. They'll come home and say, I'll take my COVID jab next time. And that's how it'll be dealt with. It's I think, for the next number of years, COVID is going to be something we'll live with, but we'll manage it very simply now the vaccines are here.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And also, I presume we ought really to be looking at a discussion around these drugs that mitigate the effects of COVID. If you've got it, you then go into hospital. As you said, President Trump receiving steroids and whatever else he did in order to try and mitigate the effects of it, having caught it. These vaccines, of course, are trying to avoid people catching it in the first place. We're hearing a lot about the fact that people that are taking vitamin D seem to have some sort of, if not a resilience to COVID, certainly able to cope with the effects of COVID. Do you see this as another area where drug companies are going to be able to score highly in terms of opportunities for profit in providing something that we can take either on a regular basis, or if we feel a little bit under the weather, possibly encountering COVID, that we can take something just very simply one evening, which will mitigate the effects?
Jeremy, look, bear in mind, COVID didn't exist this time last year, and it really appeared in the world scene earlier this year. And then suddenly within 6 months, we've got a cure for it. And we've also got a treatment. Look, a good example is, let's talk about our Prime Minister, Boris. When Boris went into hospital, he got nasty COVID. What did he get? He got oxygen, he got fluids, and nothing else. And he was in intensive care. If Boris went into hospital the same time as our friend Trump, he would have got steroids immediately, antivirals, and he'd been up bouncing around within 3 days, a bit like I call the Incredible Hulk in America. That's the difference in the rescue remedy. And unfortunately, I don't think Boris got any of the rescue remedies because they weren't approved. Steroids weren't approved earlier this summer. Antivirals weren't approved. They are all approved now. So two things with COVID. It's no longer this deadly disease we're all frightened about. I don't worry. I used to wake up early this summer, oh dear, because I travel a lot with work. I'm here in London all the time. Now I recognize if I do get it, it's very manageable. But I think going forward, the really exciting part on what's happening is nobody ever approved and realized an mRNA vaccine would work. That opens up from start to finish. That's the Moderna and the Pfizer one. Again, an inactivated endovirus, which is the Oxford one. These are radically new approaches. Oxford designed it originally for disease X. There is always worries. This one, I'm very optimistic. COVID is cured. It's just a matter of time. But what about the next one? Our company, Open Orphan, is always looking. We're preparing for the next one. But the Oxford vaccine was called for disease X. These two new platforms, if COVID-2 appears over the horizon, call it a bacterial infection, we now have a platform. Instead of taking 6 or 9 months, drug companies can double up again. And within 6-8 weeks, I think the world can attack the next pandemic. There's always the last big one was 1918, Spanish flu. And bear in mind the optimistic side, you had the roaring 20s. After most pandemics, you go back to the 14th century, the Great Black Plague here in London, around the world. And then you had the golden age of the 15th century, the age of Renaissance. So I think on the optimistic tone, think about the amount of money slushing around. The opportunities next year, I think we're going to have one of the greatest booms ever in the next 5 years, because every other pandemic, it has happened. So roaring 20s were a direct result of the Spanish flu in 1918, 1919. The golden age of enlightenment, the 15th century, followed the 14th century Great Plague. So what's going to follow this one? I think it's going to be this whole new digital world, the whole new debt-free. I think the big one is governments were never going to pay back their debt. Debt's going to be made free. That's the only one thing. Governments has piled it up, but they'll figure some way of paying it in 100 years' time. That's my belief.
So you see, despite all this, you see opportunities abounding in the next several years.
Jeremy, absolutely. Look, if you think what's happened in Britain, around the world and everywhere, you've had this colossal change. We've all got used to working from home. Even the Prime Minister is working by Zoom. Like we all have our little technical glitches, but it's working. So I think we're now going to go into the era of where the work-life balances is going to fundamentally change. There's going to be huge opportunities, and the amount of money that's pumped prime in economies. So we're going to do a great opportunity, but it's also proving, and pharma companies that have come good. People worried about pharma companies like big tobacco, big pharma, but the pharma companies from Oxford to AstraZeneca, the Pfizer, the Moderna, they delivered the goodies in 6 months. It works. So it goes to show you these brilliant scientists around the world are pretty useful. And it means this is almost a dry run. Bear in mind, the world Spanish flu killed 1 in 5 of everybody who got it. It took out 50 million people we know about. The belief is it killed 100 million people. COVID has only killed a percentage of people. But it was a dry run. We've always known there'd be a pandemic. This one, okay, has been terrible. Hopefully our governments around the world will now say, right, let's show us a pathway out of it. The vaccines are coming. I gather the NHS is getting ready for the 1st of December. Vaccinate that 5% of vulnerable people and let the rest of us get back to a normal life. And the rest of us give us an option. And that's where I've never been more excited about life in general. But I've been honest with you, early March, I was worried. April, I was not happy. And then suddenly things turned. I think there's still a lot of people out there. There are where I was March and April. When am I going to get back to work? What's going to happen? I think bear with us, get through the winter, get into spring, and we're going to have a very, very different. And think of the quick regime change. Americans have always talked about regime change in Iran, Iraq. It seems like they've had a bit of a regime change in North America. I just think of the personality difference. Biden, positive, optimistic. Our friend, I call him the giant Hulk, is leaving. I just think we're entering a very exciting era. Lots of changes is going to happen, and it's all optimistic.
Very positive note. Look, Cathal, we'll leave it there. Thanks indeed there for joining us for today's Trading the Markets podcast from IG with Cathal Friel from Open Orphan, a name-listed company which tests vaccines and antivirals. For more videos from us here at IGTV, join us on Twitter at IGTV and subscribe to our YouTube channel.